I think we're good here. So I've done a nice video for everybody about how I actually went through the process of doing an analysis of my chosen image. So I'm going to open that up now so you guys can see that. So it's a drink coaster I made, and I decided that was going to be the image I was going to do for the remote learning 6.1 activity. And I did about a half-hour video. And right as I was finishing up literally typing the last thing into my matrix in Cami, the computer doesn't warn me when the battery's low, and it just says it's shutting down. And that's what happened. It shut down in the middle of the recording. So I'm going to go over the document and show you what I did. So hopefully it will make a little bit of sense with my analysis. I was planning on having a much nicer video that had me typing it all out, but it would take another 30 to 40 minutes to do that. So I'm hoping that everybody can see what I've got here. One thing I'm going to open before we go any further actually is, so I'm going to minimize this. I'm going to open up the actual PowerPoint that we looked at as a class and specifically want to focus on the very last slide just to kind of point out a few things that they did for their particular analysis, which is at the bottom here. So this is the one we're going to focus on. You can see that they did not hit on all of the elements, which is, you're going to see in mine, same thing happened. But they did do an analysis of the balance, emphasis, contrast, rhythm, and so on. That was in the PowerPoint. So these ones were all at least touched on in one area that you can see here. So now that that's out of the way, we can kind of see what they did here and what they wrote here. Let me show you what I did, and maybe I'll give you a kind of an idea. So the first thing I did is I loaded the document into Cami, and I'm using the editing software to add text in. I drew some X's through the point and L and the value because those are not going to be utilized in my analysis. And the reason they're not going to be utilized in my analysis is because they don't really have anything that you would need to use to identify value or point. So we're going to start with just talking about the elements of the design, because the stuff down below can't be written unless we've identified what elements are in the design that I have. So if we look at this particular design, this is a drink coaster. It has, it's a block of, I think we're going to call it white oak. I think that's what that is. And within the block of white oak, it's recessed or cut down by the CNC. And then the CNC also cut out these discs of wood, and there's different colors of wood. So I'm just kind of talking myself through what I'm actually seeing first as a way to move into what to enter. The first thing I want to talk about, though, is we're going to kind of work around the area here is texture, because both smooth and rough textures were used based on materials. Now, here's what I mean by that. If we look at this design, we can see that there's definitely a roughness, especially in the edges here, to this white oak, and it doesn't really appear to be reflective. So I would say that this is a good analysis of this, is that it's rough. There's actually a little bit of a piece missing here. I did that intentionally. This board was in bad shape to begin with, so I kind of went with the roughness of it. But if you look at the centerpiece, you can see the ceiling fan in the reflection of the material that's been used to finish the Purple Heart. So you've got a fan blade here. This is a fan blade right here, and then that's the base of the fan. So it's actually quite reflective. So I wrote that they're both there, both present. I think that's a good way to look at it. Use of a cylinder to make a hole and a wooden base to surround it. So that's how I talked about the space. And what I mean by that is if you look at this, a cylinder shape was bored into the base, and then it was filled in with this small purple heartwood, which is also a cylinder because it has a radius and it has a height. The height is not very much, but it still has 3 dimensions to it. So I decided that it was probably a good idea to talk about the cylinder and how it was surrounded by the wooden base. The cylinder itself would be the positive space, remember, positive space, and the surrounding portion of wood is going to be your negative space. And this positive space, we're going to call that the part that's useful, and this would be the part that helps to hold that all together, if you will. In terms of form, we talked about that those being 3-dimensional things, right? So in this case, a rectangular prism, and it's rectangular because it has 4 sides that are equal, because this part's square, but the height of it is very short, and so it's going to be a rectangular prism. And we also have, again, the cylindrical forms being mentioned again here, cylindrical base and a Purple Heart insert. For shape, it's simple. It's a square and a circle. There isn't anything else that you need to write about that. For color, there's a use of purple and brown. And then for line, it's just straight lines and curved lines. So let's look at that image again. There you go. Straight and curved lines. Okay. There's also a little bit of natural stuff going on here. The wood itself has developed some, as it grew, it developed along in its natural state. And so you can also see some of that going on. But let's start with rhythm. And the one thing I want to talk about with this, and it's kind of out there, but it works enough, is I typed in that the random rhythm is there based on the grain direction lines. And I'm going to add a little bit to that. And natural wood growth. That makes it a little bit more. Because natural stuff is going to, a lot of times it's going to have a randomness to how it grows. And so you can clearly see that in the image with the waviness of the Purple Heart. There's a different set of lines coming in here. So there is the rhythm of the grain, but it's very random in how it's created. This one, a little bit more uniform, but not really, because you have a really open, like there's a crack right here in the wood. You've got 2 different colors or stripes. So you've got a light stripe and a dark stripe here. So I thought rhythm was a good place to focus on line use and how it's natural and it's random. Okay, next thing I want to talk about is contrast. So here I focused on the color and how contrast is used with the light brown and the purple colored wood. And I think just very quickly looking at it again, you would agree there's definitely contrast here. It's the same idea as using a red brick in with a bunch of green bricks, if you will. So we talked also about the use of texture here to use different finishes to create both rough and smooth looks also. So there's 2 places I identified how contrast could have been utilized with the elements. Next thing I want to talk about, proportion. So with proportion, I went right to space because the use of space is very important in regards to the proportion of this particular design. And I wrote this. I said the use of a large enough circle to allow for many different sized glasses. So with this drink coaster, it accommodates a variety of different size bases of glasses. And that was important to me to make it big enough that it would hold different sizes, but not so big that it's cumbersome, it gets in the way, or it takes up too much space. So that was the idea behind the size of this. Now, it would have helped maybe to have a glass in the picture with it so you could see. But you'll have to take my word for it, especially since it's something that I created and it wasn't something I just bought at the store. But you have to imagine that even a store-bought piece, the designers were thinking about, well, we want to make it a good proportion so that it can handle different size glasses that people own. Okay. So that's good. In terms of unity, I focused on the use of the circle in the base and the purple insert to unify the design. So I chose shape as one of my elements that's going to unify this thing. And the other thing is I talked about the texture. And although it's kind of out there, you have to understand we're going to talk about the use of wood in both parts to bring it together. So I'm focusing on the material and the texture of the material as a way to unify the design. Different types of wood, but nevertheless, both trees that exist in this world. So that's how I used it in terms of bringing it together for unity. We're going to jump up to emphasis. So here I chose to identify color as a way to emphasize the design. And I said the use of purple heartwood opposed to the white oak. So there's the colors, purple and white. Okay, white oak obviously is a light brown color, but I'm mentioning the actual wood that I used to show that there is emphasis. And again, looking at that, I don't think that you would say they're not emphasized. This draws your attention, this purple heart. And this is a really bad picture. If you saw these in person, you would think they're probably even nicer than they look in the picture. In terms of shape, I said the use of a circle inside of a square. So the use of color and shape to draw the attention to the center. That was the idea behind that. So again, we pop that back up and you see that, especially with a dark wood background tabletop, you get even more emphasis. But I didn't bring that up because the table is not part of the design. It's more about the purple heart. I also have ones that have a green tulip wood, so it's a green center. I have two that have a very reddish color called Padauk, and then I have some that have a reddish brown, and that's red cedar. So there are 8 of these things. But they utilize the same principles and elements. Okay, let's go down to economy. We're going to focus on that a little bit. And I didn't write a lot about it because the truth of the matter is that in terms of line, it's very simplistic. I didn't go crazy. There's nothing, aside from the natural grain that you see there, you have your straight lines at angles, and then you have a circle. And that's it. It's economical. There's nothing super special about it. It doesn't have all kinds of different woods or all kinds of different colors. It just has what you see there. So I feel like that's fairly economical. The use of a circle and a square together, nothing too special there. And then finally, if we look at the space, the circle takes up a large percentage of the square surface area. So I thought that that would be a good way to kind of point things out. I didn't go crazy in terms of the design. I really kept it simple with the use of line, shape, and space. So I wrote a little something about each one of those. Now, we'll stop for a second because the question is, do I have to use 3? Do I have to use 2? Do I have to use 1? Bare minimum, you should have at least 1 element for each principle. So what I mean by that is something should be written in each of these rows. Okay, so there's 1 thing here, there are 2 things here, 2 here, 1, 1, 2, and then this actually has 3 in it. So I feel like I've more than covered my reasoning for this. Okay, last thing is, and this is where I got lost my batteries, is coming up here in the last one, and that's balance. And remember that we have 3 types subcategorized. So we've got a symmetrical, asymmetrical, and then radial. We can't use radial, so because there's no pattern within the circle. It's just a purple circle. So there really isn't a radial balance there. And if you were to, I guess if you wanted to, you could say it's slightly asymmetrical in grain, but we're going to use symmetry because symmetry lends itself very nicely to the square and the circle that is in the center of this. So I wrote, there is symmetrical balance created by a use of a circle centered inside of a square. And that came with the actual shape thing here. Okay, same thing with space. So what I'm going to do here, and this is where the computer died on me. So I apologize, but at least you're getting to see me finish my assignment. The idea was you'd see me do the whole thing, but I think you're going to get the idea here. So in terms of this, we're using a use of a circle and square, if I could spell right, in an appropriate space to hold a drink. And that's going to create the balance that we're looking for. Okay, use of a circle and a square in an appropriate space to hold the drink. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about here, and we're talking about the balance of it, is in terms of the form, you can cut this down the middle, and we'll end up with 2 equal symmetrical pieces. Will it fit? There we go. I like it. Okay. So in terms of the form, or the three-dimensional portion of this, you cut it down the middle and we'll end up with 2 equal symmetrical pieces. And that's the form itself. Yep. So there you have it. Okay. Just kind of being a little bit more descriptive. They're not very descriptive. If we look at it, it just says formal balance created by symmetry. So I wanted to kind of point out in my design that if you cut it down the middle, that's where the symmetry is coming from. Obviously, you can tell if you cut it this way, it's going to be symmetrical. If you cut this in the middle going this way, it's symmetrical. I think mine also, if you were to go from corner to corner, you would still have symmetry with my design. This one wouldn't have that. So there you have it. That's what the assignment is all about, is basically having, and this is what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to find a picture, whether it's one you take or one you download from the internet. You're going to include, or you'll have to attach that picture in Google Classroom. So I'm looking for you guys to have a picture loaded into the assignment, not on the document. Okay, I want the picture separate. Notice how my picture is separate. It's not included in the document. I'm not going to put it in the document. But if I were to do this and I were to submit it, I would submit what I just wrote. So I would submit this, and I would also upload this picture so that when it gets to the teacher's part where they're supposed to look at it, they can open up and see what the picture looks like, and they can open up the document and see what you wrote. So I'm happy with this. It's not super involved. It doesn't take a whole lot of time. It unfortunately, for what it is, you got to see me finish it up, but you didn't get to see me do the whole thing. But I think you get the idea. So based on this, what they wrote from this ridiculous made up soap dish, and what I did based on my drink coaster, I think that this should help you guys get through the assignment. And again, I modified it. So you only have to do one item, but I am asking you to upload this document when it's completed, and to please also attach a picture in Google Classroom so that I can see what you specifically did your analysis on. I hope this helps to get things situated so that you can complete this document. All right, that's it.